This is the lecture covering ecology and biosphere. Before we get started, I want to emphasize that while we're only covering this topic in a couple of lectures, that this topic really is a very detailed topic, and one could spend an entire semester, bachelor's degree, or even PhD studying it. So what is ecology? Ecology is the study of living organisms and how living organisms interact with their environment. And one of the first questions that one might ask is, how are living organisms distributed on the planet? What are the features that govern them? The primary factors that govern the distribution of organisms on the planet include temperature, water, availability of light, and type of substrate. So if temperature is a primary factor governing which organisms are found where, then what determines the distribution of temperatures? Well, it turns out that the distribution of temperature on the planet is strongly correlated with latitude. Lines of latitude are horizontal marker lines that give us one of the two pieces of information that we need in order to precisely locate any place on the planet. So, for example, in Arizona, you'd use a line of latitude that's approximately 32 degrees north, and then you would have a line of longitude, and those are vertical lines that tell you how far east or west you are. Well, so how is annual mean temperature correlated with latitude? We find the hottest temperatures approximately 0 degrees at the equator, and those hot temperatures extend about 30 degrees north and 30 degrees south. Fundamentally, the tropics, those are the warmest parts of the planet, and the coolest parts of the planet are those locations that are 40, 50, 60 degrees north and 40, 50, 60 degrees south. So what causes this pattern? The pattern is caused by the variation in the sunlight's intensity with latitude. The Earth is far enough away from the Sun that the Sun's beams, by the time they reach the Earth, are traveling parallel to one another. At the equator, the sunlight is directly overhead, and so the number of incoming particles of sunlight, which are called photons, are most concentrated. Further north and south, there's a low angle of incoming light, and that spreads the photons over a much larger area. So close to the equator, you have concentrated light, and close to the poles, you have much more diffuse light. And each photon or packet of light energy can be used to transform that from light energy to heat energy. So you can have more heat energy at the equator than you do at the poles. And this amount of heat energy changes and shifts through the seasons as the Earth moves around the Sun. The Earth's axis is not straight up and down. Instead, the Earth is tilted at an angle of 23.5 degrees. And every day, the Earth spins once on its axis. If you are on the part of the Earth that is facing the Sun, it's daytime. If you are on the part of the Earth that is facing away from the Sun, it's nighttime. But while you're constantly, every day, you're spinning around the axis, the Earth itself also moves all the way around the Sun. And it takes 1 year to move all the way around the Sun. Now, there are 2 days of the year where the Sun and the Earth are in a position so that as the Earth spins on its axis, every place on the planet has precisely 12 hours of daylight and 12 hours of darkness. The first of those events is in the March equinox. Equi means the same, nox is night, so equal day and night. There's a March equinox, and then there's a September equinox. So we are heading towards a September equinox right now, as I'm recording, because I'm recording at the beginning of August. So once you have passed one of the equinoxes, you're heading towards the solstice. So if we start with the September equinox, where half of the Earth is getting 12 hours of day and 12 hours of night, and the other half of the Earth is also getting 12 hours of night and 12 hours of day, we're moving towards the December solstice. What's happening here? Well, the Earth is tilted on an axis, and as it moves towards its position for the December solstice, the northern hemisphere is tilted away from the sun, and the southern hemisphere is tilted towards the sun. So the part of the Earth that's tilted towards the sun gets more solar energy and becomes warmer. So towards December, the southern hemisphere gets warmer and has a summer, and the northern hemisphere is tilted away from the sun and becomes colder, and so we have a winter in the northern hemisphere. After the December solstice, which is the day in which you have the longest night in the northern hemisphere and the longest daytime in the southern hemisphere, you move once again towards the equinox, where you've got equivalent night and day, and then from the March equinox you move towards the June solstice, and so on and so forth. Now the variation in sunlight intensity is going to be much, much stronger the further north and the further south you are. So for example, at the equator, you're very close to 12 hours of daylight and 12 hours of darkness almost all the year round. Whereas if you're living in northern Canada or close to the South Pole, what you'll notice is that certain times of the year you'll have lots of sunlight, and other times of the year you'll have hardly any. An example is in Scandinavia, they sometimes call it the land of the midnight sun. In the middle of summertime in Scandinavia, the sun sometimes doesn't actually set, or it will only set for 2 or 3 hours a night, and that's in the summertime. In the wintertime, on the other hand, they'll have weeks at a time where the sun will only rise for a couple of hours, and they're in darkness. This variation in the heating of the air and the land on the planet sets up a pattern of global air circulation and precipitation. Precipitation includes rainfall and snow and hail. And the pattern starts at the equator. So this picture over here with the sunshine over 0 degrees is showing you at the equator you get a lot of sunshine, a lot of heat. When you heat up air, it expands and rises. And as the air expands and rises, the air releases its moisture and you have precipitation or rainfall. So at the equator, at 0 degrees, you have both steady, hot temperatures and plenty of rainfall. A little bit north and a little bit south, at about 30 degrees, you have an arid zone, a dry zone, where air is descending and it's dry and absorbs moisture. In Arizona, we live approximately 30 degrees north, and that is one of the reasons for the Sonoran Desert. So the changes in intensity of sunlight corresponding with latitude set up global air circulation patterns, and they determine bands of dry and wet habitats. Now, these bands of habitats can be altered by the local geography, and I'll get into that in a second. But already, with just the small amount of information, we can describe some important levels of variation in living organisms across the planet. The first level of variation is where do you find tropical forests? Tropical forests are lush, green, have huge trees, high biological diversity. These are found close to the equator and between the tropics. On the other hand, you might ask, where are the deserts of the world found? The deserts of the world are found in subtropical high pressure belts that are north and south of the equator, approximately 30 degrees. Now on to how local geography can alter your climate. This illustration is showing you the changes in vegetation structure as you increase in elevation or go up a mountainside. And for those of us living in Arizona who have driven from the Phoenix or Tucson area all the way up into the mountains, will be very familiar with this picture. Close to the city, you'll be in the desert where you'll see saguaro cacti and barrel cactus. And as you go up, you'll reach an area where there's a lot of grassland. So if you recall driving up to Flagstaff from Phoenix, there's a stop called Sunset Stop, and it's got beautiful golden green grass. You go a little bit further north, and you go a little higher in elevation, and you'll hit oak woodland and pine trees. And if you go all the way up to the top of the San Francisco peaks, you'll get to spruce and fir forest, and actually get all the way up to alpine types of habitats. So why is this? As you go up in elevation, you experience cooling of the air, and different organisms have evolved to cope within different temperature and rainfall conditions. And so, for example, at 3,000 to 4,000 feet, it's too dry and too hot for oak trees to live naturally, and so their seeds will not germinate. On the other hand, at 6,000 feet, it's too moist and too cool for saguaro cacti to be able to survive, and so you don't find them living there. Another factor that influences local habitats are the presence of mountains and the direction of wind. This image is showing you the overall wind direction across the coastal and Cascade Range in California. The Pacific Ocean has a lot of water in it, and that evaporates. So you have moist air above the Pacific Ocean. The landmass heats up faster than the water because water has got hydrogen bonds between the molecules, and those can absorb a lot more heat energy before you actually start to manifest in temperature changes, as the land heats up faster. And so what that does is, close to the coast, you end up with winds that blow from the water to the coast. As that moist air goes over the coastal range, it will start to deposit water, and then the wind will continue to move inland towards the Cascade Range. Now the Cascade Range is much, much taller, so as those clouds and as that wind with moisture move up towards that Cascade Range, the clouds will be forced upwards and cooled, and then they will get cooler and drop their rainfall. So on the side of the mountains that's closest to the oceans, you're going to be getting rainfall, and as those winds cross over the top of the mountain range, you'll find that they are dry and you have a rain shadow and a desert.